In a quiet village where time seemed to move slower than hope, there lived a man named Thomas. Life had never offered him much. Every morning, he woke before the sun, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. His roof was weak, his walls worn, and hunger was something he had learned to live with. But more than poverty, what weighed on him the most was the feeling of being stuck. Stuck in a life that never changed. Stuck in a cycle that never improved. He watched others go about their lives. Farmers working, traders selling, children laughing. And even though many struggled, Thomas felt different. He had no direction, no opportunity, no sign that tomorrow would be better than today. Yet deep inside him, there was still something alive, a quiet belief that refused to disappear. A small voice that whispered, "Your life can change." Most days, he ignored it, because hope repeated too many times without results starts to feel like a lie. But one evening, everything changed. As the sun set and the village grew calm, Thomas sat nearby listening to a conversation. He wasn't part of it. He rarely was. But this time, something caught his attention. "They say there's gold in that land." The words were simple, almost careless, but to Thomas, they hit differently. He listened more closely. Two men were talking about a piece of land not far from the village. Rumors had spread that deep beneath the ground, there was gold. Real gold. Not a story. Not a dream. Something real. Something valuable. Something that could change everything. Thomas felt his heart begin to race. At first, he tried to ignore it. He had heard stories before, things that led nowhere. But this one stayed in his mind. Maybe it was the way they spoke. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was because he needed something to believe in. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it, gold beneath the ground, a chance beneath his feet. "What if it's true?" he whispered. The question repeated in his mind again and again. What if this is my opportunity? For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about possibility. He imagined a different life. No more hunger. No more struggle. No more waking up with nothing. He could rebuild his home, live with dignity, maybe even help others. But as hope grew, fear followed. What if it's not true? What if I lose everything? Because the truth was, Thomas didn't have much, but what he had was everything. And risking it meant one thing. If he failed, he would fall even deeper than before. The room felt smaller as the weight of the decision pressed on him. Hope pulled him forward. Fear held him back. He turned from side to side, unable to sleep, his mind caught between two paths. Do nothing and stay the same. Or take a risk and possibly change everything. Hours passed. The night grew quiet. And in that silence, Thomas made a decision. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. I can't stay like this forever. Those simple words carried something powerful. For years, he had been waiting. For luck, for help, for change, but nothing had come. And deep down, he realized something most people avoid. Nothing changes unless you do. The next morning, everything looked the same. The same village, the same people, the same routine. But Thomas was different. There was no certainty in his eyes, but there was decision. And sometimes, that's enough. He didn't know if the gold was real. He didn't know if he would succeed. All he knew was this. He had a chance. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to take it. The next morning, Thomas woke up feeling different. Nothing around him had changed. The same broken roof, the same quiet room, the same empty feeling. But inside him, something was no longer the same. For the first time in a long time, he had direction. Not certainty, not confidence, just a decision. And sometimes, that is enough. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. Rough, tired, worn from years of struggle. These were not the hands of a successful man. But today, they felt different. Today, they carried a choice. The thought of the land returned to his mind. The rumors, the gold, the possibility. It still sounded distant, almost unreal, but at the same time, it felt closer than anything he had ever hoped for. Thomas stood up slowly and stepped outside. The village was already awake. People moved with purpose, doing the same things they always did. Farming, trading, surviving. Everything looked normal. But to Thomas, it felt different. As he walked through the narrow path, he began to notice something clearly. Everyone was living the same life, repeating the same routine. Safe, predictable. And that was the problem. He passed by a group of men, talking loudly. "People like us don't get lucky like that," one of them said. Another laughed. Gold. That's just a story to fool desperate people. Thomas slowed down, listening. Their words followed him, not in sound, but in thought. What if they're right? He stopped walking. The question hit him harder this time. You'll lose everything. You'll look foolish. You're not different. The fear was real. Heavy. Almost enough to stop him. Thomas closed his eyes briefly and took a deep breath. Because another thought came, quieter, but stronger. If you do nothing, nothing will change. He opened his eyes again. And in that moment, everything became clear. There were only two choices. Stay and live the same life forever. Or take a risk and face the unknown. Neither choice was. But only one had the chance to change everything. Thomas looked around the village one more time. The same houses, the same people, the same struggles. And suddenly, he understood something deeply. If he stayed here, nothing would ever change. Slowly, he nodded to himself. The fear was still there. The doubt had not disappeared. But his decision had become stronger than both. That day, Thomas began to prepare. Not with excitement, but with quiet determination. He returned to his small home and looked at everything he owned. It wasn't much. A few clothes, a worn mat, simple tools. This was his entire life. He picked up each item carefully, not because they were valuable, but because they were all he had. Then came the hardest part, letting them go. One by one, he sold what little he owned. People watched. Some shook their heads. Others whispered, "He's lost his mind. He's chasing dreams again. He will regret this." Thomas heard them, but this time he didn't stop, because something had changed inside him. He was no longer living based on what others believed. He was acting on what he believed. By the end of the day, he had gathered everything he could. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to take a step forward. As the sun began to set, Thomas stood outside his home one last time. The place that had held his struggles, his pain, his waiting. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because he wanted to stay, but because leaving meant there was no going back. He took a deep breath. This is it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just truth. Then he turned and began to walk. Toward the land, toward the unknown, toward the possibility of something greater. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know if the gold was real. But for the first time in his life, he was moving forward. The journey to the land was not far, but for Thomas, it felt longer than anything he had ever walked. Each step carried weight, not just from the distance, but from the decision he had made. There was no turning back now. The village slowly faded behind him. The familiar voices, the routine, the safety. With every step forward, he left all of it behind. Ahead of him was silence, open land, and uncertainty. When Thomas finally arrived, he stopped. He didn't move immediately. He just stood there, looking. The land was quiet, too quiet. No signs of treasure, no signs of anything valuable. Just dry earth stretching under the sun. For a moment, doubt returned, stronger than before. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what I risked everything for." The wind passed gently, carrying dust across the ground. There was no answer. Thomas swallowed slowly, because this was the moment where dreams meet reality. And reality didn't look promising. But then, he reminded himself of something important. He didn't come here because it looked like gold was there. He came because he believed it could be there. He tightened his grip on the shovel. It wasn't new. It wasn't strong, but it was all he had. "This is where it starts," he said quietly. He stepped forward, chose a spot, and drove the shovel into the ground. The first strike wasn't strong. The soil resisted. Hard, compact, unwelcoming. Thomas pulled the shovel out and tried again, and again, and again. Each movement felt heavier than the last. The ground didn't give easily. It pushed back, but so did he. Minutes turned into hours. The sun climbed higher, burning against his skin. Sweat rolled down his face, soaking his clothes. His hands tightened around the handle, already beginning to ache. Still, he continued, because once you begin, stopping becomes harder than continuing. The hole was shallow at first, just a few inches, then a little deeper. Each layer of soil removed felt like progress, even if it revealed nothing. Maybe it's deeper, he told himself. It has to be. He imagined the gold beneath him, hidden, waiting, just out of reach. That thought kept him going. As the days stretched on, his body began to protest. His arms felt heavy. His back ached. His breathing grew uneven. But he didn't stop, because stopping meant facing a question he wasn't ready to answer yet. What if there's nothing here? So instead, he kept digging. The rhythm became steady. Strike, lift, throw. Strike, lift, throw. Time lost meaning. The world shrank to just him and the ground beneath him. Hours later, as the sun began to fall, Thomas finally paused. Not because he wanted to, but because his body demanded it. He leaned on the shovel, breathing heavily, then slowly looked down. The hole was deeper now, noticeably deeper, but still empty. No gold, no sign, nothing. A quiet tension filled the air. Thomas stared at the ground for a long moment, his chest rising and falling slowly. This was the first real test, not physical, but mental, because effort without results is one of the hardest things to endure. He wiped the sweat from his face and sat beside the hole. "This is just the first day," he said quietly. "Of course I wouldn't find it immediately." He nodded slightly, trying to hold onto the belief that brought him here. But deep down, a small crack had formed, not enough to break him, but enough to be noticed. He stood up again, slowly, painfully, looked at the hole one more time, then at the land around him. This is only the beginning. This time it wasn't just hope. It was a promise to continue, no matter how hard it got, no matter how long it took. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Thomas gathered his strength. The day had taken a lot from him, but it had also given him something. Proof. Proof that he had started. Proof that he was no longer just dreaming. He had taken action. And sometimes, the first step isn't about success. It's about proving to yourself that you're willing to try. Thomas looked at the hole one last time before leaving. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't deep enough. It wasn't successful. But it was something, and for the first time in his life, something was more than nothing. Tomorrow he would return, stronger, more determined, or so he believed.